Good evening, good evening. Good evening, we're getting ready to begin. Keep eating, but we'll be beginning in about 2 minutes. Okay, just a minute. Yeah. So we're going to resume in just a minute. That music was splendid, by the way. Who was that, by the way? Who was the artist? Do you remember? You know what artist that was that you were piping through?
That was John Duval, I think it was, the last one there.
Yeah, but that was splendid music that fits this occasion tonight. We're going to move this agenda. The reason we're going to move this agenda because when you deal with an establishment like that, they send somebody with an announcement and says, you don't have to go home, but you got to leave here. And so that's why we're going to try to see if we can get out of here on time. I'm going to introduce you know, in the Bible they said that, you know, you need to pay attention when your grinders start to fail and your windows begin to close. But your windows are your eyes. And that's why I'm trying to get a little help here. But I'm going to bring in a peacemaker and a peacekeeper from the Dominican Sisters of Houston. Yeah. Yes, indeed. So Sister Roger with the Dominican Sisters, she's a longtime HPJC board member, and also she's from Peace Camp. She helps to arrange venues, and she's also part of Giving Insightful organization of guidance. So we're going to ask our sister to come up. Come on up, sister. Thank you so much.
Good evening. And as Bill said, it's really good to finally be meeting again in person, even though this is a smaller crowd than we've had in the past, but it's great. So anyway, it is my pleasure and privilege to present the local HPJC Peacemaker Award this evening to Dr. Maria Elena Botazzi and to Dr. Peter Otez of Baylor College of Medicine and the National Institute of Infectious Diseases here in Houston. Dr. Botazzi and Dr. Otez are receiving the awards tonight for their outstanding work developing the Corbevax vaccine for COVID-19, as well as for their research on often neglected tropical diseases. Dr. Botazzi is an Associate Dean in the National School of Tropical Medicine. She is a professor in the departments of pediatrics, tropical medicine, and molecular virology, and microbiology and integrative molecular and biomedical science programs, and translational biology and molecular medicine program at the Baylor College of Medicine, and that's a task. Just to say that is a task. And Dr. Otez is the Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at the Baylor College of Medicine. He is also a professor of the departments of pediatrics and molecular virology and microbiology at Baylor. In addition, he is the endowed chair in tropical pediatrics at Texas Children's Hospital and co-director of the Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development. Working together, they developed the Corbevax vaccine. Hundreds of millions of doses of the Corbevax have already been made and distributed in India. They've been shipped to African countries and elsewhere. In addition to the Corbevax, they developed a halal version of the Indovax for Muslim majority countries. The Indovax vaccine was recently approved for emergency authorization in Indonesia as a primary vaccine for adults. The hope is that the Indovax vaccine will be as successful in Indonesia as it was in India. Unlike other vaccines, they are making the Corbevax and the Indovax available to the world without the expense of a patent or royalty payments. That the large pharmaceutical companies are requiring. As a result, many of the low and middle income countries are able to get people vaccinated for the cost of production. In an article about Corbevax that was published in Very Well Health in January of 2022, Dr. Thomas Russo, professor of chief and Chief of Infectious Disease at the University of Buffalo, New York, had this to say. The researchers are giving up their intellectual property rights to make the means to do this available to all countries, and most importantly, to low-income and middle-income countries. They're basically giving out the recipe to allow the vaccine to be made inexpensively. It's a very cool thing and can be critical to getting more people in the world vaccinated against COVID-19. Yes, indeed, it is a very cool thing to do, and we're very proud that they're here in Houston and looking forward to doing the rest of it. Organization meeting in Geneva. We do have a short video from him, and after which Dr. Bottazzi will receive the awards for both of them.
I want to express my profound gratitude to the Peacemaker and the Houston Peace and Justice Center for the honor today. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. We're busy accelerating our COVID vaccines for all the world's low and middle income countries. In the meantime now, the vaccine, 95 million kids in India, and now it's been approved as an adult booster, and we're over 10 million adult booster doses. So that's extremely exciting, and the latest news is the second version of our vaccine has now been approved in Indonesia in collaboration with their major vaccine producer known as Bio Farma, and this will be the first halal vaccine for Muslim majority countries. So I think we've shown that we have to be a multinational pharma company to make a difference in global health. And that's very much the can-do spirit, I think, of Houston, and one of the reasons why both Dr. Bottazzi and I were so excited to come down to Houston 12 years ago, the Houston Peace and Justice Center, because this is what we do, science in the pursuit of humanitarian goals. Along those same lines, I'm also personally invested in combating the rise of anti-vaccine activism, which unfortunately has emerged as an important negative societal force, and a lethal one as COVID pandemic, due to the fact that they refused a COVID vaccine despite their widespread availability. So we have a lot of work to do, not only on the science side, but also combating anti-vaccine important issues, because equity is months. Thank you.
Maria Elena Bottazzi. Amidst uncertainty and anxiety, kind least expected. Thank you, prophets, pointing us to the direction, opening the hearts of the world. Us affects all of us. The Peacemaker Awards tonight.
I really love, the writing of the award. I mean, this is very special, and it's really a pleasure, a real pleasure for me to be here with you all tonight. And it's really amazing to see so many peace, justice, environmental activists celebrating the mission and vision of the Houston Peace and Justice Center. And I'm so very much looking forward to the powerful keynote that Dr. Miller will give us. And congratulations on certainly your national award. But it's also a very big honor for me to receive the local award, not only alongside my science partner, Dr. Peter Hotis, but also share it with local champions. State Representative Symphonia Thompson, over there, and Leonore Walker. I think it's really very special. And let me tell you why. Let me tell you, because like Peter mentioned, and I'm going to try to maybe reinforce this message, for more than 2 decades, we've been here 12 years, but we were 12 years up in the Northeast. We had a dream. We had a dream that our scientific work, which now is a advanced a mission to develop and test these new, low-cost, safe, effective vaccines that are against many emerging, many parasitic, many neglected diseases, but that it would be done by building and strengthening the capacity for vaccine development locally, and especially with foreign nations, and that we would do it by also guiding and influencing how we could contribute to vaccine policy and advocacy. So we immediately knew that our approach would be an out-of-the-box approach, changing a lot of paradigms, because we needed to rely on this intersection between science with international collaboration and diplomacy, with solidarity, and that in our minds is the formula that really can achieve health equity and justice, especially for the world's poorest populations, and with the use of vaccines. So our bright scientists, because neither myself nor Peter are the ones who really are working hard in the laboratories, it's our team of scientists that they started creating and making the vaccines right here in the laboratories here in Houston, with the intent to then transfer that knowledge and that technology with the philosophy of open science, removing barriers, as you heard, we limiting our intellectual property protections, but with very good and trusted partnerships, with transparent communications, and all to help incentivize that indigenous capacity. And in doing so, we also guided and influenced, equity in access, and leading to have them be self-reliant, be autonomous, and be able to really respond to the need. And that is why I'm really very honored to be here with you. And this is probably one of the beautiful awards that we've been getting, because the Center for Peace and Justice really reflect what we want to do. And as you all, we believe very, very much that education, care, training, collaborations will become more just, more sustainably prosperous, and more peaceful world. And that's really the true definition of diplomacy. So we are the first vaccine center, as Peter mentioned, that we developed this affordable COVID-19 vaccine technology. And why is that? Because we applied 4 basic principles. We used a technology that had no patents, and therefore it could be shared. It's easy to learn, it's adaptable, and that it can produce at very large scales. And earlier you heard about Cuba. And even though we didn't work directly with Cuba, I can tell you that the Cubans, with their vaccine Abdala, they read our papers, they read our science, and they applied it, and that's how Abdala was produced. It's the same technology. I actually was privileged to visit Cuba this summer with a delegation, a research delegation, and you have no idea how they were applauding that a laboratory in Houston was enabling them to really create and eventually produce their own indigenous vaccine. The second reason is because our technology, being simple and being well known, is also a very stable technology, has very long shelf lives, and it really also was very good with the cold chain requirements for storage and for distribution. And that's how we can enable larger access and delivery of our vaccine. But more importantly, it's also a very affordable technology. It's less than a couple dollars a dose. If you compare it to what vaccines certainly cost here in the US and how the other COVID-19 vaccines, this is probably one of the cheapest vaccines. And it's also a vaccine that was previously known. The technology has a track record of safety and efficacy. And we think that that's why it can lead to also a large increase of consumer confidence. So Peter mentioned Corbevax. So Corbevax is a name that was given indigenously in India. It was developed in partnership with a company called Biological E. It's a private company, it's a woman-led company, and it's a company that basically took our technology has the ability of produce 100 million doses a month.
Wow.
I think this year we're going to hit that 100 million dose mark of delivery of vaccine. And more importantly for us, India, the government of India selected Corbevax to be specific to be delivered to young kids between the ages of 12 to 14 years of age. Now it's more open, now it's being distributed also in adults as booster doses, but the initial deployment was in the pediatric field, and that's very important for us since we work in Texas Children, so they were very happy about that. But we had another partnership which we knew was going to be a game changer, and it's the partnership with Indonesia. Indonesia, we were working with a company called Biopharma that is a state-owned company. It's not private, it's owned by the state. And they had a cultural need. They needed to have their vaccine ideally certified halal so that they would not only support their populations, but also the Muslim majority countries. And we actually for years had been preparing for this, even pre-COVID, that all our documentation, all the work in our laboratories had to be suitable, had to be culturally intelligent to be able to fit those needs. And importantly, the technology that we use is very, it's vegan. Many of you here are eating vegan, vegetarian. It's vegan. Yeast technology, which is the way that we make our vaccine, it doesn't have any animal-derived components, has no human cell lines, and it's especially perfect for being halal certified. So more than 20 million doses are currently being distributed right now in Indonesia. But I don't think we have stopped there, right? We also are working in Africa. We are working in Botswana specifically. We're also working in Latin America and many other regions of the world, in regions where currently they may not have capacity to make vaccines, but that they're building that capacity. And that's very important because we want the world to be self-reliant and self-sufficient, hopefully not for another global pandemic, but certainly to support, finding their own solutions. So our vision and our dream has come true. And it really was enabled by the strong underpinnings of science, intersecting it with diplomacy. But most importantly, and I have to say this also because I'm very religious, I'm a Catholic, so I'm very happy that I am, introduced by the sisters. And I have to also finish by words that Mother Teresa said. You never have lived until you have done something for someone who can never repay you. Thank you very much.
I've been asked to let you know that Dr. Hotez will also receive the identical award and that the inscription, I think, is in your program. Thank you.
If we don't take anything away from other than any other comments tonight, that comment that she made by Mother Teresa, believe it or not, somehow I've never heard that comment before, and it's equivalent to whatever the Dalai Lama or Martin Luther King might say. It was a powerful comment. So again, one more time, can you repeat what you just said from the floor? That comment.
You have never lived until you have done something for someone who can never repay you.
My Lord, if you've never lived until you've done something for someone that cannot repay you. Lord have mercy, that's something to go home with. So thank you so much for the comment, and thank you for your work, and thank you for your contributions. sure I think you're going to understand what I mean when I say that I'm going to introduce Dr. Christine Kovic, Professor of Anthropology and Cross-Cultural Studies at University of Houston Clear Lake. She was sent by one who was greater than herself, Miss Lenora Walker. So, Miss Kovic, please come on up and introduce the one greater than yourself.
Thank you so much for the introduction. It's great to be here tonight and to be here with everyone. And I want to start with a quick history for Houston going back to 1980, which was the year that Casa Juan Diego was founded in the city of Houston as a place to welcome and receive the refugees and immigrants who were coming to our city. It was Mark and Louise Zwick, following the Catholic worker ideas of nonviolence and radical hospitality, who founded Casa Juan Diego here, and they welcomed all who came through the doors. Many of the migrants were fleeing the violence of US-supported wars in Central America. They listened to people's stories, they learned from their stories, and adopted what they were doing. So, for more than 40 years, continuing to this very day, thousands of people have found shelter at Casa Juan Diego. Many more have passed through to receive medical care or food, other social services. The Houston Catholic Worker newspaper shares stories from the migrants themselves and puts these stories in the broader context of US policy and the global economy. But Casa Juan Diego wouldn't exist without its volunteers. So today, we're honoring one of them, Lenore Walker, who has volunteered at Casa Juan Diego for nearly 25 years, cooking once or twice a week, organizing food distributions, celebrating children's birthdays, and above all, has supported women and their families for the long term, listening to their stories and the challenges they face as immigrants and refugees, and accompanying them as they navigated their new lives, creating networks of support. You can learn more about Casa Juan Diego at www.cjd.org. And I've seen the work of this one volunteer up very close over the years because she's my mother. So I'm very happy to introduce you to Lenore Walker, one of the recipients of the local Peacemaker Award.
Thank you, Christine. I'm very nervous. My granddaughter Maria has agreed to stand with me tonight for a little moral support. I'm very humbled and honored to be included for this recognition with all these other distinguished award recipients. Thank you. I started my adventure with Casa Juan Diego 24 years ago when I met with its founder, Mark Zwick. He asked me what I really enjoyed doing, and I responded that I love to read and I really love to cook. Mark said, "Stop right there. It has been my dream to have someone come in and cook for the women here at Casa Juan Diego. These women come to us often with young children, tired and exhausted from their arduous journeys to Houston. Casa feeds them and gives them a place to stay, however they have to contribute. With duties such as cooking, cleaning, etc., in addition to caring for their children, and I had hoped to give them some relief by having someone cook for them. And that's how it all started for me. I started cooking only once a week, but soon began cooking 2 days a week, and often cooking the dinners too, instead of just the lunches. Until the recent COVID pandemic occurred. Since COVID, CASA has seen a tremendous amount of people, families coming to our door for food. I mean, I've come to believe that Houston must be a really hungry city, because all these people, I mean, they've always come, but there's just more and more of them now. And it's been a real challenge for us, believe me. So I would like to share a simple story with all of you. It started when I arrived home last week, and there was a small delivered anonymous package at my door. When I opened it, I found a small trophy-like item with a star covered with gold speckles. At the base, something was written. I was tired and impatient that day and thought to myself, who would send me something like this? I didn't think it was you guys. So after talking this over with some of my family, it was called to my attention that it sounded like the inscription was from one of my ladies. So after dinner, I called her, and she immediately said, oh, it's already arrived. She then proceeded to tell me that it was picked out and the words were chosen by her 12-year-old son, who I love dearly. The inscription said, well-deserved of all hearts is Lenore W. So this little star trophy immediately became worth $1 million to me. And that's how I feel about a lot of my women, my ladies. My ladies, as I call those closest to me, come from Mexico, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Africa, and as far away as China, among other places. I feel honored to be present here tonight for so many women and their children who have struggled and who have passed through the doors of Casa Juan Diego. Their friendships have become the greatest gift to me, a wonderful blessing to me. And this is my story, a very simple joy. I want to thank the Peace and Justice Center for their efforts in awarding me this recognition. Thank you all very much.
With deep gratitude that we honor you for being mother to the world in your care for immigrants and refugees, Casa Juan Diego has been a lifeline to so many, and your dedication to serve is one of the reasons people continue to knock on the doors of hope. Answering the calling of your soul has healed the hearts of many and inspires others to serve. We appreciate your healing love and seeing no one as a slave.
You better remember to put her on. When Dr. COVID left the stand, I said that she was going to be succeeded by someone greater than herself. She was actually succeeded by 2 people greater than herself, especially that leader of the Tamara, that lovely granddaughter that she has. I'm going to introduce someone who is not a stranger to you, somebody who has a profound talent at dealing with adults that are oppositional and non-compliant. I urge you to listen to his show, Politics Done Right, because I squirm in my seat because I'm often saying tell the jerk to get off the radio. But he does such a job. He has a real faculty, he has a real talent, and he's also our technical guy. So let's give him a round of applause for Egberto Willis.
Well, it's really all about a special lady. I only have 2 minutes, so I have to be quick, and her history could last 20 minutes, 30, 40 minutes. She has built her legacy from a strong principle of faith and unwavering defense of freedom and a staunch belief in fairness, and exemplifies the American ideal that one person can make a difference. She received her high school diploma from Booker T. Washington High School in Houston and has a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from Texas Southern University, a Master's of Education from Purdue University, and a JD degree from Thurgood Marshall School of Law, and a Master's of Law in International Law from the University of Houston. She has worked tirelessly for Texas' most vulnerable populations and relentlessly fights for increase to personal needs allowance that seniors in nursing homes are allowed to keep for purchasing items like mouthwash, cell phone minutes, and haircuts. She is the longest serving African American woman in Texas history and helped found the Texas Legislature's Black Caucus. This upcoming 88th session will be her 50th year of service to the state of Texas. Yeah, I know. You can't, if that's serving the people, you gotta give that. She has proven her commitment to those less fortunate with her tireless fight for equality and opportunity for all throughout her illustrious career. She has led the fight against human trafficking and successfully passed the James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Act, Texas' first and only alimony law, and the state's current minimum wage law, among many, many others. She's a women's rights champion, passing legislation require insurance coverage for 3D mammograms, anti-cancer oral medication, testing for the human papillomavirus, extended protections for victims of domestic violence, and increased access to certified sexual nurse examiners for victims of sexual assault. She plans to reintroduce legislation that creates the Brain Institute of Texas, designed to award $3 billion in grants to public and private entities studying diseases of the brain, such as Alzheimer's, autism, traumatic brain injuries, mental health disorders, multiple sclerosis, and much more. And having a daughter who's just had a stroke, thank you so kindly. She's an Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority member, but without further ado, I'm proud to introduce the Houston Peace and Justice Center Local Peacemaker Awardee, the Dean of the Texas House of Representatives, Texas Women's Hall of Famer, the Honorable Señora Representante Senfronia Thompson.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am indeed honored to receive this award. I was thinking as Albert was introducing, saying those introductory remarks about me, there was a guy named Mr. Holloman. He was 91 years old, and this was just before Katrina. And he was helping me to try to get an increase in the personal care needs in nursing homes. And you can just imagine, you get a diaper in the morning and you get a diaper at night. But you may need a diaper change between those two times. And he was saying, Ms. Thompson, I guess we're gonna have to wait the next session. And I said, can't repeat it in this audience though, but we're gonna get that money. We needed $39 million. I called Governor Perry up. He called me back at my desk. So, Sophronia, I just don't see how I can give you that. I said, well, I don't see how you can't give me that. So we kept talking about it. And we kept talking about it a lot. Finally got him down to the point that he did. And he finally conceded that he would give us the money. I just pleaded with him, and I just wore him out all that day. that happened and we got the money, this guy was 91 years old. He always came to the Capitol to lobby. And he died knowing that he had accomplished a goal that he had worked so hard for. He was a member of the Silver Hair Legislators. Votes matter, election matter, but more importantly, people matter. And I guide my life by something in the Bible that says, speak for those who are voiceless, who cannot speak for themselves. And I consider myself a drum-made rat for those persons who are helpless, who cannot speak, who cannot stand up and fight, who cannot go to the Capitol, who cannot articulate a need that they have, a solution that they may have. And I am so interested in continuing my fight. I'm 83 years old. I see my little sister sitting over there, Tammy Campbell. But God willing, I'm ready to fight another 10 or 12 years. Thank you for your graciousness. Thank you for this award tonight. It means a lot to me, and I am so humbled that you chose me for this award. Thank you.
All right. Here we go. Texas State Representative Senfronia Thompson, we recognize and acknowledge your place in history as an unrelenting and tenacious force of nature. You advocate for equity and justice for those disaffected and disenfranchised. Springing from the core root of your advocacy is compassion for those forgotten, for those whose problems appear just too hard to solve, like the one you just mentioned, and for those whose voices are silenced or ignored. Your service keeps hope burning for a more just future. For all you do, both the seen and the unseen. Thank you, thank you. Presented at HBJC Peacemaker Awards Dinner, Saturday, November 12, 2022, Bill Crozier, President, Houston Peace and Justice Center. Thank you.
Don't go anywhere. Jose's technical problem. Okay, let's try that. Smile. Good. One more. All right, thank you.
Wait, no, not yet. You guys get me.
Okay, I got you.
Got it?
Yeah. And I'm going to tell her, in some other circumstances, the reason I wanted a picture is not because of all of the stellar achievements. I wanted a picture because she's easy on the eyes. Okay, I can get away with that. I can get away with that. I'm an old man too. And look, for all you old men here who's sitting in these chairs, the only reason you're sitting in the chairs, you don't know where the latrine is. It's right outside the door to the left. So y'all make your trip. Everybody has told to Washington, D.C.
Oh, yes.
And we had her representing in the best tradition. You know, we've had some standout representatives from the Houston area, including Senator Barbara Jordan. We've had Representative Mickey Leland. And so we are very proud so well, and I know as a successor. She needs to talk with us first. We come to the point of our program to challenge the people who have cell phones before and around this cell phone. And if I should have brought her up with me, but I do have the auspicious night tonight. We've got to brag. Houston done, or maybe I need to say I done herself. And it's more like women hold up 3/4 of the world. And we thank you for holding it. We live in Harris County. Our jail in Harris County, maybe hundreds of people in cells with feces. Jail. We have suicides in the Harris County jail. The new Jim Crow. The sequel. Somebody who has probably done more research. Bell, originator of the work that Dr. Miller has done. A MacArthur Fellowship. And you know, when somebody who has received that Stephen Williams I talked to him and I read him talk to the Health and Human Services staff that deals with and the afterlife of mass incarceration is based upon partners and friends in Chicago searching for justice. Life after lockout. You can watch. Also note that you can. Is Go Family, the law and justice team for My Brother's Keeper. We're going to look at it and we're going to draw some conclusions because we said theory is good, but work is better. And by the way, give a hand to him. Okay, good. Come on up because he's the father of that.
Got some words of my own. Coordinator for the Houston Peace and Justice Center. A lot of you may be honored to present our national feeling empowered, team attacking the world. I'm not unique in this regard. I searched, are you familiar with the term? Someone is incarcerated for spoke of radical hospitality, but also this extreme intersection of race, punishment, and the afterlife, physical movements. Dr. Reuben Jonathan Miller is my James Baldwin, my Dr. Amos Wilson. Choose for the national peace. But this man, when he speaks, Dr. Passion, reflect on what these policies say about it, so that once feared strangers can, in turn, and to imagine a world with just meeting, we appreciate your leadership, your
Great, thank you. Help me, Lord, you're doing. This is such the august group, literally millions of lives, quite literally. And to think about the legacy of this award in the center, rights in the age of mass incarceration, we've forgotten who we throw away. This 91-year-old man that wants to feel a sense of dignity. And I owe so much to so many people. Amber, who is here, Ade, who couldn't make it. Thank you also to the many attorneys. I could spend my time with you listening to many about justice in our country. So I just get one that perhaps does not include police in jail, sexual offense, who've committed sexual offenses. We not need the unequal forms of justice. We would know, or at least we would take as we must acknowledge the origins and indicators of our time. When James Baldwin published his occasion of her arrest, Baldwin's sight for the American people that they would be in their chains. They count their safety. Attempts to drown you in a sea of crocodiles, right? Like he will tell you about yourself and your visions of the American state, revealing the nation's failure to reckon with its history. An increasing but underappreciated number of poor whites would think about where we are in time and space. If we released every Black American today, The political scientist Marie Gotts talked about this as a black problem. Prisons, though we think that criminal justice folks were criminalized and over-policed, despite their shared circumstances. This is an old trick. Terrorizing the nation's growing prison state, a link fate obscured by the ignorance that politicians and that black people were the cause of their own problem. And increasingly militant black youth is the source of. We are 50 years into this experience. Since the publications of Baldwin's open letter, the United States since 1970, just 12% of the U.S. population. So while it's not Latinos occupying the cages writing steadily, and black women who's incarcerated, similar trends are found among an Alzheimer's disease. Do you know this? Because there's an Alzheimer's. Being gay and bisexual youth, and especially LGBTQ youth of activist campaigns highlight the acute forms of trans women of color. That is, poor black and brown trans black children, nearly all of whom are poor. But there are many more pipelines than this. There's a child protective services. There's a mental health of folks who were murdered by police, who were killed by police. There's a premature death, post-incarceration kind of the general population. 11 times more likely to die within just 2 weeks. If you 127 times more likely to die in the land of the free than there are in any other nation in the world. It's Baldwin tells us, if you really, you ask any Mexican, you ask any Puerto Rican, you ask any love for it. That's at this point. Beginning in 1972, every year for this is also, as I talked about, sentences than their white counterparts for criminal history and the types of crimes that are committed. In other words, citizenship that political scientists in a racially subjugated community. This is the point of police stop. People we've decided that we would be afraid of live in an alternate legal reality that we. I want to make this case about race and punishment, this long tale, March 24th, 2017. Check out what they're saying, something about kids and a basketball game and a gun, light-skinned Salvation Army Croc Center. By the time the police arrived, the boys had dispersed 20. The gun was a revolver. There was a basketball game. He goes from the officer's chest cam. He puts his car in park and opens the driver's side door. We see down the barrel, but his voice is calm. 2 of the boys get down, 3 move slowly. Fidgets, unsure of whether to lay on his belly or walk toward the officer. What did we do, bro? Asked another pro. Was this the youngest child? Reports say the boys are between his request. Can you please, murmuring 12-year-old, build into a full hour. Just calm down. It'll be tries to reason, whimpering. I have a basketball game tomorrow in some code. A mother seeing the action from her stoop moves. She must go to him. Ma'am, shouts this one. This time speaking to the mother from the stoop. He just happened. Everything's okay. He says this twice. I'm sorry, I didn't mean no disrespect, but you should have to understand, she says. He says this as if it's an argument, as if they're all pointed at her child. Her voice breaks. Baby, we don't deal with police. We never even have no charges. We don't do this. Officer talking to 2 parents. Right place at the right while. You know, we didn't know what to do. You had a gun, but you drew your guns on our child. There was, of course, no weapon. The mother's impulse to go to her child being held at gun. Why would a mother stand by and that no one was hurt? Much worse has happened under. We're familiar with this cruel and remarkable history of police procedures. Black people were stopped at the street outside their home. There is no right place for these children. Now, innocence. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, brother. And presumed guilty. The same police force around the same time her home. Her mother pleaded. She's only for the stabbing of her little sister. This is a violent offense. The child screamed no as they put her in hand. Who had been through so much so soon, or to be afraid of, perhaps worse, to look upon with his families in a public statement. Within the hour, 2 police. But how did we get here? In some ways, this is an old story. Black people, criminal, moment of racial slavery. Ate different food. The peoples, like the Eastern Europeans and the classes of barbarians, traded by warring empires for sin. They sold strangers. Those outside, first imagine yourself created. I'd like to tell you, when slaves and white indigenous work in solidarity against slaves, who they found generalized sin, some generalized the presumption of white innocence, of a happy, and on the other side, we see picking. You see the difference. Happy and docile, in the words of historian David Levering Lewis, the African. Either way, the result, black people by the thousands were failing to work, for attempting to leave, for petty the South. This was in 1890. Now, the history from this point has been told: wars on the poor, the war on crime, the war on drugs, and to some extent, he's held those 5 unarmed boys at gunpoint. The collect boys were viewed as less innocent than whites when polled, and they were viewed as that white Americans became more aware of this. Black boys were not only guilty, but black children were no longer viewed as innocent. They were super predators from the night, disconnected from school, and they do more time. No wonder unarmed black boys are 21 more times from school or not. No wonder white boys in this country will be arrested before they turn 23. When I run into someone and I ask them, this is a bar graph. I'm trying to show probation of parole. We know that they're a given day. If you compare this to the institution, number of people who move through, for example, accounting. But if we compare this to the number of people with felony convictions, with a figure 10, and even this figure is eclipsed by the number of people estimated by the Bureau of Justice Statistics that have a criminal record. What I say is that mass incarceration, public's imagination, is one regulatory of the collateral consequences of a criminal conviction. I remember I mentioned that 80 million include the 1 in 2 Americans who have a family member that's done time. To target people with records, trying to figure out what do you face when you come home. Others, but affects every American. 4,000 laws, policies, and administrative sanctions on how one might be able to spend time with their family. In your state, the state of Texas, there are over 4 access to business licenses and property and access to housing. That's the same number. New York looks the same. This is the world that we've made. The first story I told was a response to people who we later, who maybe we did have a reason to fear at some point in his lifetime. He shot, and on the day of his release, they handed him $25 in gate money, a voucher good for 30 days rent, and they told him to report to his parole officer. The voucher for the 30 days rent was at a halfway house on the south side of Chicago where I come from. So Zoe had done 9 years in the federal penitentiary on this bid. And he had been to all kinds of jails and prisons while he was a kid. Juvenile detention, what we call the Artie home, that was how we talked about it. And here's Zoe on his 28th day of almost freedom. Now, he had come to the halfway house and he had reported nearly a month before, and he heard the rules. No drugs, you cannot smoke, you must do that outside. No visitors, no pets, right? Take your food stamps, turn them into me. We'll distribute them amongst the 15 or so men who all live here. That's how we eat together. You're responsible for $400 a month rent. If you can't pay that $400 a month rent, you're gonna face eviction. Now, this was a halfway house. This wasn't a regular apartment. This was something like what my grandmother might have called a flop house. There were no 5-day notices. If you didn't have your rent, you will be put on the street. And Zoe had been many things in his young life. He had been a drug dealer, he had been a drug robber, he had hurt people, he had never been homeless. Here's Zoe on the 28th day of his almost freedom, wondering what he's gonna do. He owes $400 in just 2 days, so he gathers his things in a black garbage bag, and he begins to walk the neighborhood. I should say something about the neighborhood. Zoe is on the south side in the neighborhood called Auburn Gresham, but Zoe grew up on the west side in the neighborhood called K-Town. K-Town was a neighborhood where all the street letters began with K. And he's walking in what he thinks is foreign land and what he understands to be hostile territory after having spent 9 years of prison and never wanting to go back. $400 hanging over his head. No one had called him back for a job, though he applied for many. And even if they did, he wouldn't have gotten a check in time to cover his rent and bills. So he's walking the neighborhood, pacing. And what does he see? He tells me, 2 dope boys standing on that bus stop, flashing their little cash. Now, I'm not gonna say that people engage in crime only because they're hungry. There's a long literature on the sensual pleasures that people experience when they take power over someone else. In fact, there's an interesting book called The Seductions of Crime that studies students at my school. I teach at the University of Chicago. And those students engaged in what they talked about as sneaky thrills. They would shoplift. These are largely rich students. This is a private, my school costs $60,000 a year to go to, right? Like, so these are largely rich students paying this $60,000 tuition who would often shoplift because they felt good. I'm not saying that crime only happens because people are hungry. I think that would be a misrepresentation. I even know people who shop because they enjoyed it. I know people who like the way a gun felt in their hands. Many of you may know people like this too. But here's Zoe. 28 days free with $400 that he owes and 2 boys standing on the corner flashing their cash. What did you do, Zoe? What did you do? He told me not wanting to go back to prison. He stood on that corner, he looked at those boys, and he cried. He just stood there and he cried. This isn't the end of Zoe's story. I'm glad it's not the end of Zoe's story. He had heard about this halfway house I told you about, the good one, not the bad one, called Emmaus Road. And he heard about it in prison. So Zoe jumps on the bus with $2 that he found somehow. I didn't ask him. He gets on the bus, he goes an hour and a half from the far south side of Chicago to the west side of Chicago. And he gets to Emmaus Road, this halfway house, and he knocks on the door. And he asks if he can have a space in the institution. But they don't have a space in the institution. It's one of the few good halfway houses in the city. They tell him that there's a waiting list, it might take a couple weeks for him to get a place. But the program manager, seeing Zoe's need, offers him a place to sleep on the couch. He says, you sleep on that couch, you don't get in trouble, we'll let you wait here until a bed opens up. He does that, he sleeps on the couch, a bed opens up, Zoe gets in the program. It's hard for him at first. It's awkward for him. He's never felt so dependent on anybody else. He goes through the program, he does well in the program, he excels. They hire him at first as a groundskeeper. He's cleaning up trash. He had never done that before either. But Zoe made a decision, he never wanted to go back to prison. He's hired as a groundskeeper, they promote him from groundskeeper to house manager. Zoe finishes the program, he's promoted from house manager to a service provider within the program. He's sent from their temporary housing, which was only 6 months, to transitional housing, which allowed him time, about 2 years to get his footing. He excels, he excels, he excels. He goes from transitional housing to permanent housing. Today, Zoe is the director of programming at Emmaus Road. Zoe faced all the problems. Racism, social exclusion, fear, loathing, disdain. And Emmaus Road provided him a place in the world, a place first on the couch. They took a chance on the brother. He had a long record. But they let him sleep there. They practiced a kind of hospitality. They allowed him in. And not only did they allow him in, they allowed him a place in the world. First, the job as a groundskeeper. But it wasn't just the worst off menial job that they offered him. They offered him a path to promotion because they knew what we know. That one thing that drives human beings is something like mastery. The ability to take on a task and do well at it. Zoe moved up in the ranks because he was allowed to move up through the ranks. Zoe took leadership at Emmaus Road because they allowed him to take leadership. They weren't so afraid of him that they didn't allow him to run the program of the organization. And this is a beautiful story of a beautiful organization that did the right thing in a testy moment. But it is also an example of state failure. Emmaus Road is the social service agency, like many of the agencies that are here in this room. Emmaus Road had a budget of about $2 million. When one of the participants committed a crime in the neighborhood, Emmaus Road got sued for $1.4 million. Emmaus Road almost closed its doors, almost had to, because it didn't have the resources to withstand what the risks that it takes on people who've made mistakes. This is an example of organizational success in the midst of state failure. Whose responsibility is it to rehabilitate? Whose responsibility is it to provide a place in the world? Emmaus takes it on as its responsibility, but it's all of ours. So how do we get free? I think we begin to get free by seeing beyond the individual interpretations of social life that we've become so accustomed to. We've associated crime with the moral failings of individuals. But what do those 5 black boys do? What do all the brothers sitting inside our local jails and prison on pretrial detention, having not yet been convicted, do? About 2/3 of them will walk home because their cases will get dropped. We associate crime with moral failings. And so we say, you do the crime, you do the time. You get what your hand called for, we say. But mass incarceration is not an individual problem. Mass incarceration is a structural problem. It requires structural solutions. So what we have to do in this room is we have to advocate for the kind of world where someone like Zoe has a place in it. Advocate for change for law and policy. We've got 44,000 laws, policies, administrative sanctions. I don't think we need 44,000. We have to provide a bridge to resources. We're talking about resource-poor people. They need a bridge to resource-rich institutions. What we've done is we've said to people with criminal records, you are required to get a job in a labor market with 19,000 labor market restrictions, and you're required to do it without a referral. Do it on your own. When almost everyone in this room got a job because our cousins, brothers, uncles, sisters, aunt told us about Larry who knows somebody in the supervisor's office. In fact, the literature says that most of us get jobs because of something called weak ties, not because of even direct connections. We have to promote the intrinsic humanity of people with records, even people who've engaged in crimes of violence. I think we have to launch a careful media campaign that centers experiences over just outcomes. If you're looking for whether or not somebody's rearrested, then what you'll find are those 5 black boys who were pulled over for no reason. We have to move beyond things like recidivism and employment as central measures of success, and we have to focus on things like human thriving rather than risk reduction. And this is the big ask, really. What we've done is in our thoughts about innocence and guilt, we focused, especially in light of the problem of violence that plagues many of our communities, on public safety, our own safety. We've promoted our own safety. We've looked for safety. We've sought safety. And in seeking safety, we've written 44,000 laws, policies, and administrative sanctions that exclude people with criminal records from accessing the political economy and culture. We said, we're afraid of you. We don't want you anywhere near us. But what we've done is we've made them unstable. We've promoted precarity, and 100 years of criminological research tells us that limited access to employment, limited access to one's family, and housing instability leads to more crime, not less. In other words, what we've done in seeking safety is legislated more violence and more danger, which means we have to be brave. The vulnerability can't just be on their part, asking us for jobs, crumbs at the master's table. We have to be vulnerable and allowing people, even people we're afraid of, a place in the world if we want to see things like crime and violence reduced. So my big ask is to focus on human thriving rather than just public safety. Above all, we have to listen carefully to people with criminal records themselves. Every successful movement has been led by people who are directly impacted by the question at hand, whether it's the women's rights movement, the bread riots that we saw in the 1920s and 1930s, whether it's the civil rights movement, whether it's the movement for abortion rights, LGBTQ rights. People who are directly impacted have led those movements. But for some reason, when it comes to people who made a mistake, who we think have made a mistake, we think that they can't assume leadership. Glenn Martin, the founder of Just Leadership USA, has this wonderful quote that he says, he coined a term, he says, those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but furthest from resources and power. We have to not only believe in the leadership of people that we've thrown away, people we're afraid of, but we have to invest in it. I think we live in strange times. I know this was a depressing talk, but you didn't read my bio and ask me to come here thinking I was going to motivate you. I know what I said, I know what I read, I know what I write about. I write about the world that we've made. We live in strange times. But we just set every prisoner free today. We still have this supervised society that we've erected. All these laws will still be on the books. think we live in a supervised society. I think we've made a supervised society out of our fear of the other. And I've tried to raise new questions, new theoretical questions, new empirical questions. What do you count? How do you think about it? But the question before us is neither of those. It's not a scientific question, it's an ethical question. We've made a supervised society. The question for us is, what kind of society do we want? Thank you.
One more time. And he invoked the spirit of Jimmy Baldwin. How many of us are fans of Jimmy Baldwin? My dear, his time has come. Look, we have some cards on the table, but in the interest of time, we're not going to fill around with the cards on the table. We're going to ask you, we don't have a mic to pass around, but we're going to ask you if you would just stand right where you are and use your loud, rambunctious voice right at your table, and Dr. Miller's going to come back up, and he's going to answer your questions. We're going to ask you to be brief. So if I raise my hand, that means that we want to convert you from asking a statement, convert you from a statement to a question. Okay, we're ready.
Any questions? I love your questions.
Right here.
Please.
So when people get out of prison, to me it seems like I would want a mentor if I were getting out of prison after being prison. How many people get a mentor, that hand-holding type of person they can call when they're depressed and what have you, who will help them re-enter society?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, not enough. So if I let's just point attention to a very specific thing. So a mentor for a very specific problem for people coming home. Let's say a mentor for somebody who's struggling with a substance issue, for example. The literature tells us that in prison, that we have that about, thank you so much, that about 10% of the people who are mandated to get drug treatment in prison receive drug treatment because of the limited capacity in prisons to provide it. When you come home, it's about 25%. So there's the capacity for people who are required to do a drug treatment program. We have the capacity to meet the needs of only about 1 in 4 of them. That's the capacity. That's not the quality of the program. That's not the regulation. So that's one major problem that we all sort of feel like people who have a drug problem, should have access to treatment kind of thing. Let's think about the other problems. Like, what does it mean to have been locked in a cage for 10 years? What does that do to you? How do you feel about yourself? How do you relate to your family when you come home? So things like family reunification services, for example, are key, but fairly new kinds of services that are just being offered in the last decade inside jails and prisons. But about half of males who go to prison have children, and close to 2/3 of women. And in the case of women, about 60% of them are the primary caregivers in their families. And despite this, we don't have much by way of things like family reunification services. So the service need is immense. The need is immense, but we don't yet have the capacity to address it. This is why I'm stressing that this isn't like a kind of thing you can treat. It's not a treatable. I mean, you can at an individual level, at the level of a service, and services do great jobs. But a place like Emmaus Road can't address the needs of the 17,000 people who return to the community that it's located in. It can't. The needs are just too great. And so we need a state level response to these kinds of questions.
One other question, real quick. I'm sorry, but have you looked at Germany, or what country could you look at and say, wow, they do it right. They know how to treat people
Germany's got a much better system. Norway, of course. I mean, there's a famous headline from The Guardian, Norway, where prisoners are treated like people, for example. And so Norway has famously open prisons for people who are low security risks. Norway allows for free, like conjugal visits. You don't have to be married, for example. And so the kinds of things that we see in American jails and prisons, despite the more lax and much more robust welfare state, let's say, there's also like a set of supports when you come home. So despite being, despite sentences being shorter, despite supports being greater, despite it being like what we might call a softer on crime kind of situation, their rates of violence are way lower, satisfaction in life is way higher, right? And so honestly, every developed country has a more humane, I think, prison system in the U.S.
Thank you. Thank you. Next. Yes, sir. Roger.
Thank you for your work, and that was amazing.
Thank you.
Two quick questions. One is, when you say that this idea of we need to define expand our definitions, and you got me thinking the idea of expand the definition of risk, of thinking of people who represent a risk to us, but it's like as a society, when looking at black people, at immigrants, if, as it happens, keep doing all these laws to protect from that risk, what is the risk to us as a society?
Yes.
Like the risk of what we can become.
Yes.
No?
Yes.
And
Yes.
in that, in some way, like we're saying what we became.
That's right. That's right.
And in that context, in the crisis of American democracy right now, do you think that the institutions we have right now, can we produce the kind of change that we need to get free or to heal, or how it relates to this need for like?
It's a great question.
Change?
It's a great question. There are a couple of, okay, I want to address your question in two parts. So part one is, what's the risk to us? The risk to us is that the American Democratic Project has been transformed one poor family at a time. We've altered the contours of the Democratic Project, so much so that there's a legitimacy crisis that pops up every time we see a new vision of abuse, which is why people mass up at the borders, which is why people are less civically engaged, for example, which is why you see things like violence that breaks out from time to time, distrust in the government. There's a whole literature on something called system avoidance. So for example, when you treat somebody like this, what's the likelihood that they're gonna show up at a place where they could get help to sort of get around it? So avoiding hospitals, avoiding social service agencies, avoiding school, so the institutions that we've associated with social mobility, upward mobility, and the strength of the democratic project, things that hold up our democracy, folks tend to avoid because when they go there, they're punished. They're punished. And this punitive logic shows up not just in jails and prisons or through immigrant enforcement, or it's not just through the carceral sort of side of things. Every time we talk about waste, fraud, and abuse and welfare claims, every time you go to seek help of any kind and you're treated like scum, that carceral logic shows up. And so abolitionists will say, start over. You got to rebuild this thing. You got to build something else. You need a different kind of institution. And I'm not an abolitionist. I'm sympathetic to the project, though, of reimagining a different kind of world and different kinds of institutions that don't rely on punishment to address social problems. There's an organization, a not abolitionist group of scholars, for example, that are run by one scholar of mass incarceration named Bruce Weston called the Square One Project. And their question is, what happened if you start over? What does policing look like, for example, if you just start over? If the role of the police looks different, what role might they take? What does protection from the police agency, for example, look like if it doesn't look like this? These are the kinds of questions I think we need to be asking ourselves. I don't think we have the capacity in its current form to address the problems that we've created for ourselves. We have to think, I think, more radically about the kind of society we want.
Well, Dr. Miller, you brought it, okay. My question is in reference to where do we start? We talk about the school prison pipeline. We're cultivating criminals in the school system. You got more police in there than anywhere.
So I think, well, so let me say two things. I think you start wherever you have influence. So I think that what I'm trying to demonstrate is that this isn't just a problem for criminal justice. It's across institutions, and you're pointing to the schools specifically. So it's in the way we do social welfare policy writ large. It's in the way we do policing, of course. It's in how we think about housing policy. It's in the gated communities that we build to protect ourselves from one another. It's in the extent to which we embrace social inequality, where we valorize, for example, folks who get rich over everybody else. It's in our exploitative practices, our practices of extraction. We have to think about these things, how we do community development. It's wherever you have influence. You know, that's where you exert your force. As far as the school is concerned, I mean, I think there are a number of ways a number of things that I've seen across the country that are really wonderful and productive. I mean, for example, the emphasis on restorative justice instead of like punitive justice, for example, I think has a lot of promise. I think thinking carefully about the extent to which we use suspensions and who we're suspending. I think the problem though is a problem of imagination. How do we think about children? Do we see them as children? Do we see them as delinquents? Do we see them as children? Do we see them as problems? You know, especially Black and brown children, especially children on the bottom wherever you're from. So if you're from California, if you're from Southern California, how do you look at a young Filipino child? How do you understand them? That's the question for us. There was a study done by education researchers that had teachers look at a video, and they said, when you see deviant behavior, what I want you to do is I want you to signal to us that you're seeing deviant behavior. This is the experiment. And folks thought, and they put a Black boy and a white boy and a Black girl and a white girl, and they had them in the room, and the teacher was supposed to identify the deviant behavior when they saw it. And they thought that they would have a male problem, and then they thought that they would have, and that's not untrue, they thought they would have a male problem. The boys would be flagged as engaging in deviant behavior more than anybody else. And they found, of course, they had a race problem, that Black children were being sort of flagged for engaging in deviant behavior more than everybody else. But the trick was that there was no deviant behavior that the kids were engaging in, the teacher was just told to look for it. And so when you're told to look for it, you look for the places that are familiar to you for this kind of social problem. And this is why we did this long history before we got to the point of Zoe. You know, right? It's the long history before you get to Zoe. How do you get to a Zoe? You know, how do you get to pulling over 5 boys? How do you get to seeing 5 boys coming from a basketball game and think to yourself, oh, they're a danger? I have the same feeling too. I live in South Shore. It's a neighborhood in Chicago. I live on the South Side. In my neighborhood, there have been 4 murders in my neighborhood. I choose to live in South Shore. Our family, we choose to live there. So when I see the brothers, I feel the same thing. But the question isn't how do I feel? The question is what do I do? Right? What we're trying to do is wait for people to get over their racism, wait for you to get over your prejudice, wait for you, right? I might have a weird feeling about LGBTQ people, which would be awful and unfounded and ridiculous and silly. I might have that feeling. My feeling doesn't matter. How do I treat LGBTQ people? And do I work on how I feel about LGBTQ people? What we're trying to do is trying to convince people to not be racist. Yes. We're trying to convince people to not be prejudiced of all sorts. It doesn't matter how I think about women in my own sort of formation. It does, absolutely. I gotta work on that. Right? I gotta work on my patriarchy. I have it. I have to work on it. I have to identify it. I have to work on it. But it really matters what I do with it. And so the question for formerly incarcerated people is not, are you afraid of them? Are we afraid of them? That's not the question. The question is, what do I do in light of them? How do I legislate? How do I govern? And if I don't believe that they're fully human participants in the human community, capable of making mistakes like everybody else, it's on me to act like I do. That's the point of at least my work.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Look, folks, we're just about out of time. And look, I don't know how judicious we can be in giving people the floor because the management says we're going to have to send them some Bitcoin or something to stay here. But look, Reverend David Johnson, and if you can give it real quick, Miss Pop. Okay, so Reverend Johnson, well, real quick, we got about 5 minutes to come back.
Doctor, if I think I understand you correctly.
Come up a little closer, Johnson.
If I understand you correctly, Doc, what I'm thinking here, what I think I
I'm hearing is that we got to change our mindset. And somebody mentioned Germany and the difference in the penal system here in America as opposed to Germany. Well, Germany hasn't monetized incarceration. They only have 10 prisons in the whole country worldwide. The job over here is to keep prison beds full so folk like Michael Jordan can invest in these prison corporations and make money.
Exactly.
We got to change the mindset about the prison industrial complex and not monetize it so much. I mean, if you tell folks you can spend some money, make some money by investing in this corporation, just because we imprison people gives you an opportunity, that doesn't mean you got to take advantage of it.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Well, I'll say the point is, I thank you so much for that. The point is making an ethical commitment and to live from that ethic.
I like that.
Like that's the point, to live from the ethic. You know? So like, let's say my mind never changes about how I feel about Vietnamese children. I'm making something up. Of course, I don't have this. But let's say I served in Vietnam. I'm afraid of Vietnamese folks, let's say. Whether I'm afraid of them or not, the question for me is, what do I do with that? How do I govern? How do I think about law and policy? How do I treat folks who show up at my door? Do I engage in hospitality or do I engage in fear? Like that for me is the point. So the mindset absolutely is important. But I would like to say that I don't think we have time for people to change their minds. I think we have to have a politics of action, you know, where we govern, where we act from what we know to be morally right, not how we feel in a given moment in time. That's what I'm saying.
Let's give him a hand. So we've had a spectacular evening. Ms. Potter, can you do real quick? Okay, all right then, good. So we've had a spectacular evening. Dr. Miller has a limited number of books outside. I'd like for you to flow to those books. And I want to give a few thanks and shout outs. I first want to give a shout out to KPFT. I think that we're probably going to have, if not the entirety, certainly some snippets of this in days to come from KPFT. So each one teach one, each one reach one. Let's take this message to the community. And those of you who have been peacemakers and peacekeepers, we want you to stay the course. And the final thing I would like to say is that a message for those of you who are partisan that goes out to Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell, the blue wall held in Arizona. So, nobody has been called. Give yourself a hand. Let's give all the progressives a hand. I'm going to turn this over to Bill Crozier, who has given me a labyrinth, a maze, to try to figure this thing out. And my mind is kind of simple-minded, but I want to thank Bill Crozier and where's his lovely wife? Okay, raise your hand. And what I would like to say in terms of the masterful work that Bill Crozier and his team did in putting this together. I don't see him blazing on any of this, his wife's name, but she does understand that she has veto power. She cut all this off. And so we want to thank you for being so cooperative. Come on up, Bill.
Thank you, Wally, and I'll be really quick. I just want to give another thank you to all of our Peacemaker awardees for all the wonderful work that you are doing and will continue to do. So thank you. And thank you, Omawali, for being MC for us. Appreciate that. And again, thanks to all the volunteers. There's a lot of them, including some who are not even here, who helped make this possible. It's really a joint effort. Just real quickly, as Omawali mentioned, we have some books for sale, a limited number. I hope Dr. Miller can stick around and sign them. We got them from Brazos Bookstore, not Amazon, so you can feel good about that. It's a local independent bookstore here. Just want to remind you that, we depend on donors to do the work that we do. We'd like to expand Peace Camp, make it available for more children, especially more from low-income communities. We'd like to do so much more to all of our working groups. Madeline mentioned, some programs that Media Management's going to be presenting next month. That's co-sponsored by our Military and Foreign Policy Working Group, along with the Foreign Policy Alliance. We'd like to do so much more with all of our working groups. So if you'd like to help with any of those, go to our website, either financially, contribution, or if you'd like to be a volunteer, go to our website, click on the Join Us link up at the top, and there's lots of ways of helping. If you'd like to make a donation tonight, you can do it at the book table, or there's some envelopes on the table. If you want to just mail us a check, that would be okay too. But we do depend on all of you, and we thank you so much for your support. And also just remind you can keep your program booklet. It's got information on all the Peacemaker awardees. The centerfold has the inscription that was on their certificates. And on page 6, and at the following page, it has more information about HBJC. So thank you so much, and appreciate your support. And tell your friends about what we do. And go in peace. Thank you.
Excuse me just a second. I'm Wally James with Progressive Forum on KPFT, and we'll be playing a big chunk of his talk this coming Thursday at 6 p.m. Thank you for coming.
All the awardees can come up front just for a minute so we can get a picture of you together. If you're all still around. All the Peacemaker awardees, if you could come up front. Maybe come up on the stage if you don't mind.